He stood there in his worn-out shoes watching the girl he loved walk away with someone else, and what she said to him that day would haunt him for years, but also become the fuel that would transform him into someone nobody ever expected him to be. This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a young black man from the toughest streets of Chicago's South Side, who was told he would never be anything but proved the entire world wrong in a way that will leave you speechless. Marcus grew up in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birds singing in the morning, where the smell of poverty hung in the air like a thick fog that never lifted no matter how hard you tried to escape it. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep a leaky roof over their heads, waking up at 4 in the morning and coming home past midnight with her feet swollen and her eyes barely able to stay open. His father had left when Marcus was only 6 years old, disappearing into the night without even a goodbye, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and a broken promise that he would come back someday. Marcus remembered watching his mother cry silently in the kitchen that night, trying to muffle her sobs with a dish towel so he wouldn't hear. But he heard everything, and it broke something inside him that he didn't even know could be broken. Every day Marcus walked past the nice houses on the edge of his neighborhood, the ones with freshly painted fences and cars that actually started on the first try. And he would wonder what it felt like to live without the constant weight of worry pressing down on your chest like a boulder you could never move. He went to a school where the textbooks were falling apart and the teachers had given up hope on most of the students before they even learned their names. But Marcus was different, because he had this fire inside him that refused to go out no matter how hard the world tried to extinguish it. He stayed up late, doing homework by candlelight when the electricity got shut off. He studied in the public library until closing time every single day, and he dreamed of a life that everyone around him said was impossible for someone like him. Then he met Vanessa Monroe during his junior year of high school, and suddenly the world didn't seem quite so dark anymore, because she had this smile that could light up an entire room and make you forget about all the pain you were carrying. She was beautiful in a way that made his heart stop every time he saw her, with eyes that seemed to see right through all his defenses and into the part of him that still believed in something better. Vanessa came from a completely different world than Marcus, living in one of those big houses with the perfect lawns and parents who drove luxury cars and never had to worry about whether they could afford groceries that week. But somehow for a brief moment in time none of that seemed to matter, because when they talked after school in the library, it felt like they were the only 2 people in the entire universe, and the differences between their worlds just melted away into nothing. Marcus fell for her hard and fast, spending every moment he could find just to be near her, walking her to class even though it made him late to his own, writing her notes that he was too nervous to give her, imagining a future where they could be together despite everything stacked against them. He saved up money from his part-time job washing dishes at a local diner, money that his family desperately needed for rent and food, but he saved it anyway because he wanted to take Vanessa out on a real date and show her that he could be someone worth her time. After 3 months of saving every single dollar he could spare, eating nothing but ramen noodles and skipping lunch at school to save money, he finally had enough to take her to a nice restaurant downtown, nothing fancy by her standards, but it was everything to him. That Saturday evening, Marcus put on his only good shirt, the one his mother had bought him 2 years ago, that was now a little too tight and had a small stain on the collar that he tried to hide, and he walked 45 minutes across the city because he couldn't afford the bus fare if he wanted to have enough money for dinner. He showed up at Vanessa's house with flowers he'd picked from a community garden, his hands shaking with nervous excitement as he rang the doorbell of that massive house that looked like something out of a magazine. Vanessa's father answered the door, looking Marcus up and down with an expression of barely concealed disgust, his eyes lingering on Marcus's worn shoes and the cheap flowers trembling in his hands. And Marcus felt himself shrinking under that judgmental gaze, but he stood his ground because he had come too far to turn back now. Vanessa came down the stairs, looking absolutely stunning, in a dress that probably cost more than Marcus's mother made in a month. And for a second, his heart soared because she smiled at him, and he thought maybe everything was going to be okay. But then he saw her mother whisper something in her ear, saw the way. Vanessa's expression changed from warmth to something cold and distant, and he knew before she even opened her mouth that his world was about to crumble. She walked him outside, away from her parents' earshot. And what she said next would replay in his mind 1,000 times over the years that followed, each word cutting deeper than any knife ever could. Vanessa told him that she couldn't go out with him, that her parents would never approve, that he needed to understand they came from different worlds, and no amount of wishing could change that reality. But it wasn't the rejection itself that destroyed him. It was what she said next, with her arms crossed and her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She said she needed someone who could actually provide for her, someone with prospects. Marcus stood there on her perfect suburban sidewalk, feeling like his entire chest had been ripped open and his heart torn out, while she was still talking her words, becoming a blur of sound as the world around him started spinning out of control. The flowers fell from his hands onto the concrete, where they looked suddenly pathetic and wilted, just like he felt in that moment. And he could uneven find words to respond, because what do you say when someone confirms every fear you've ever had about yourself and your worth in this world? She looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been relief that she was getting this over with, and then she said the words that would echo in his mind every single day for the next 5 years. The words that would either destroy him completely or forge him into something stronger than steel. Vanessa said that poverty wasn't attractive, that she felt sorry for him, but she couldn't sacrifice her future for some high school romance with someone who would probably never escape the hood, and that maybe he should focus on just surviving instead of dreaming about things that were never meant for people like him. Then she turned around and walked back into her house, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in Marcus's ears, leaving him standing there alone on the street as the sun set behind those perfect houses that he would never be good enough to enter. He walked those 45 minutes back home in a daze, his mind replaying every word, every look of disgust, every moment of humiliation. And when he finally got back to his tiny apartment, where his mother was sleeping on the couch after another 16-hour shift, he went to his room and cried harder than he had cried since his father left all those years ago. But something happened in that moment of absolute despair. Something shifted deep inside Marcus that would change the trajectory of his entire life. Instead of letting the pain destroy him, instead of believing what Vanessa and her family thought about him, instead of accepting the future that society had already written for him, Marcus made a decision that would require every ounce of strength he had, and then some. He decided that he would prove every single one of them wrong, not for revenge, not to win Vanessa back, but to prove to himself that he was worth more than the circumstances of his birth, that the address on his driver's license didn't determine the size of his dreams or the depth of his potential. That night, Marcus wrote down a promise to himself in a notebook that he kept hidden under his mattress, a promise that he would become successful beyond anyone's wildest imagination, that he would rise from nothing and build something extraordinary, and that one day he would look back at this moment and see it as the beginning rather than the end. Marcus threw himself into his studies, with an intensity that bordered on obsession, staying up until 3 and 4 in the morning reading every book he could get his hands on, teaching himself subjects that weren't even offered at his underfunded school. He graduated as valedictorian despite every obstacle thrown in his path, and he applied to 47 different colleges and scholarship programs, writing essays late into the night about his dreams and his determination and his refusal to let his circumstances define his destiny. Most of them rejected him, their polite letters basically saying he wasn't good enough or didn't fit their profile. But then MIT accepted him with a full scholarship, recognizing something in his application that spoke to raw genius and unbreakable will. His mother cried tears of joy when he told her, holding him tight and telling him she always knew he was special, that his father leaving was his father's loss, because he missed seeing his son become a man who would change the world. College was brutal in ways Marcus never expected, because suddenly he was surrounded by kids who had every advantage handed to them on a silver platter, who complained about problems that Marcus would have killed to have, who had never spent a single night wondering if they would eat the next day. He felt out of place in every classroom, every study group, every social gathering where people casually talked about their summer homes and ski vacations, while Marcus was working 3 part-time jobs just to afford basic necessities that his scholarship didn't cover. The imposter syndrome hit him hard, whispering in his ear that maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he should just quit and go back to where people like him were supposed to stay. But every time those thoughts crept in, Marcus would remember standing on that suburban sidewalk with flowers at his feet and rejection burning in his chest, and he would push harder, study longer, refuse to give up, even when his body and mind begged for rest. He discovered a gift for computer science and artificial intelligence, spending countless hours in the lab working on projects that fascinated him, losing himself in code and algorithms that felt like puzzles he was born to solve. His professors noticed his talent, his dedication, his unique perspective that came from seeing the world through eyes that had witnessed real struggle and real pain. Marcus started developing a software program during his junior year, something that began as a class project but grew into an obsession, an idea for using AI to help underserved communities access resources and opportunities that were usually reserved for people with money and connections. He worked on it every spare moment he had, fueled by coffee and determination and a vision of creating something that could actually make a difference in the world he came from. By his senior year, Marcus had built a prototype that caught the attention of a venture capitalist who visited campus for a tech conference, someone who surpassed Marcus's background and recognized the revolutionary potential in what he had created. The investor offered him $2 million in seed funding to develop the software into a full-fledged company, an offer that left Marcus speechless, because $2 million was more money than everyone in his entire neighborhood combined would see in their lifetimes. His mother cried again when he told her, this time over a video call, because he was too busy to come home, and she told him she was proud of him beyond words, that she had sacrificed everything because she believed in him, and now he was proving that every sacrifice had been worth it. Marcus dropped out of MIT 3 months before graduation to pursue his company full-time, a decision that terrified him but felt right in his gut, and he poured every ounce of energy into building something that could change lives while also proving every doubter wrong. The first 2 years were absolutely brutal, filled with 80-hour days and constant rejection from investors who looked at his age and his background and decided he was onto a safe bet, who smiled politely, while thinking he was just another kid from the hood who got lucky once, but would crash and burn eventually. He faced racism and prejudice at every turn, watching mediocre white entrepreneurs get millions of dollars for half-baked ideas, while he had to fight tooth and nail for every dollar despite having a product that actually worked and actually helped people. There were nights when Marcus wanted to quit, when the weight of responsibility and the constant struggle felt like too much to bear, when he wondered if maybe everyone had been right about him all along. But Marcus kept pushing forward, kept refining his product, kept pitching to anyone who would listen. And slowly, the company began to gain traction in ways that even he hadn't dared to imagine. Major corporations started noticing what he had built, seeing the potential to reach markets they had never been able to access before, and suddenly the same investors who had rejected him were calling his phone, begging for a meeting. 3 years after starting the company, Marcus secured a massive contract with a Fortune 500 company that valued his software at over $50 million. And just like that, he went from struggling entrepreneur to legitimate success story. The tech blogs started writing articles about him, calling him a visionary and a genius, praising his innovative approach to using technology for social good. And Marcus read those articles with a mixture of pride and bitter amusement, because he remembered when those same people would unabused have given him the time of day. By the time Marcus turned 27, his company was valued at over $200 million, and he had become one of the youngest black tech entrepreneurs in the country, featured in Forbes and invited to speak at conferences around the world. He bought his mother a house, not in the neighborhood they came from, but in a beautiful suburb with a garden where she could finally rest after decades of breaking her back to provide for him. And he cried when he handed her the keys, because it represented everything they had survived together and everything she had sacrificed to get him here. Marcus had money now, more money than he knew what to do with, but it didn't feel the way he thought it would, because the hole inside him had been filled by success, and the memory of that night with Vanessa still stung even after all these years. Then one evening, Marcus attended a charity gala for underprivileged youth in Chicago, an event he agreed to because giving back to communities like the one he came from had become central to his mission and his purpose. He was standing near the bar in a custom-tailored suit that cost more than his mother's old monthly rent, talking to other entrepreneurs and philanthropists, when he saw her across the room, and his entire body went rigid with recognition and unexpected emotion. Vanessa Monroe looked older but still beautiful, dressed in an expensive gown and laughing at something a man next to her was saying. And for a moment Marcus was transported back to being 17 years old and heartbroken on a suburban sidewalk. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and he saw the recognition flash across her face. Saw her expression change from casual enjoyment to shock to something that looked almost like fear. And Marcus felt a surge of emotions he couldn't quite name. Vanessa made her way over to him slowly, her steps hesitant and her smile uncertain. And when she finally stood in front of him, she looked up at him with wide eyes and said his name like a question, like she couldn't quite believe it was really him. She told him she had read about him, seen his interviews, followed his success from a distance, and there was something in her voice that sounded like regret mixed with admiration. Marcus listened politely as she made small talk, asking about his company and complimenting his achievements, and he could see her mind working behind her eyes, could practically hear her recalculating his value now that he had money and status and respect. Then she did something that didn't surprise him, but still managed to disappoint him deeply. She touched his arm gently and suggested they get coffee sometime to catch up, her smile taking on a flirtatious quality that made his stomach turn, because he knew exactly what she was doing. For a moment, Marcus considered telling her everything he had wanted to say for years, unleashing all the pain and anger and hurt that he had carried like a weight around his neck since that terrible night. He thought about reminding her of every cruel word she had said about making her feel small the way she had made him feel small, about proving that he was good enough now by rejecting her the same way she had rejected him. But as he looked at her standing there trying to charm him with hollow compliments and transparent interest, Marcus realized something profound that changed his entire perspective on everything that had happened. Vanessa hadn't destroyed him that night all those years ago. She had accidentally given him the greatest gift anyone could give, the gift of motivation born from pain, the fuel to become someone far greater than he ever would have been if she had said yes. Marcus smiled at Vanessa, a genuine smile that came from a place of peace rather than bitterness. And he told her politely that he appreciated her kind words, but he was uninterested in rekindling anything from the past. He explained that he had moved on from that chapter of his life, that he had built something meaningful not to prove anything to her, but to prove something to himself, and to help other kids like him believe they could escape the circumstances of their birth. He told her that success measured in dollars wasn't real success. That real success was becoming someone who lifted others up rather than putting them down. Someone who saw potential in people that society had written off. Someone who understood that worth wasn't determined by zip codes or bank accounts. Vanessa stood there looking confused and slightly offended, clearly not used to being rejected, especially by someone she had once dismissed so casually. And Marcus felt nothing but pity for her, because she still didn't understand that the most valuable things in life could be bought or measured or displayed at fancy galas. Marcus walked away from that conversation feeling lighter than he had felt in years, because he finally understood that his journey had never really been about her at all. It had always been about him discovering his own strength and his own worth, regardless of who believed in him. He realized that the boy who stood on that sidewalk with tears in his eyes and flowers at his feet had died that night, but from his ashes had risen a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of achieving. The lesson that Marcus learned through years of struggle and triumph was that success is the best. Revenge, or that proving people wrong, should be your motivation, but rather that your worth is inherent and unchangeable, regardless of what anyone else thinks. That the only opinion that truly matters is the one you hold of yourself, and that real victory is on reaching the top of the mountain, but becoming the kind of person who brings others up with you on the climb.